Hello once again, and welcome back to Storytime with Mary's Child Development Series. We are still loving our conversations with Baba Dazi, who's a clinical psychologist from Hearts and Minds Aloud. Today, we want to talk about emotional intelligence in kids. I think we could all do with a little bit of emotional intelligence, even adults. But we want to talk about kids because we know that kids can be quite insensitive to each other sometimes, and that can be a problem. I want to talk about boys and girls in terms of emotional intelligence. And I want to understand from you, Baba, if there's a difference between the two sexes when it comes to emotional intelligence.
Yes, Mary, that should be an area of interest. So there's some research that has shown that girls display greater levels of most emotions than boys do. And the research is congruent, probably throughout the lifetime, because even in adult life, it says that women are better at, discerning and processing emotions. So in a sense, that would be an accurate statement to say, girls are probably better at picking up or expressing emotions. That being said, it's important to note that developing emotional intelligence is intentional. And so if anybody, regardless of their gender and depending on their environment, their intention and the effort that they put into picking up and processing and expressing emotions properly, they'll be able to do it well because they've put some effort into it.
But, in terms of kids, what age do you think that they start to develop emotional intelligence? Because, like I said at the beginning, kids can be really mean to each other. And sometimes you wonder, are they thinking about what they're saying at all? So, is there an age we should expect them to start to develop some kind of emotional intelligence?
You're right about them being mean to each other, but in the same breath, they can also be very supportive and very emotionally sensitive. So you would find a child as young as, for example, 2 or 3 years, comforting a friend who was sad. So I think that at every age, children display some level of emotional intelligence. We might not call it that because it hasn't blossomed, or they probably don't think of it as emotional intelligence, but they know, to share, to be there for friends, to, like I mentioned, comfort them in sadness, show a little bit of anger, but apologize. All of that falls under emotional intelligence. So these things start very early, even as early as age 2 or 3, you would see signs of that. But in terms of putting a solid age to it, you would see that at about age 10, children are able to show, definite signs of emotional regulation, which is where, which is what is significant, because when you are able to regulate your emotions, there's a lot more balance there. And then you can pick up on other people's emotions and, know how to work around them too, basically because you are regulating yourself emotionally. So in terms of age, that's what I'll say. I think that at every age, there is some form of emotional intelligence going on there, which is age appropriate. And then at about age 10, you find that it's more significant.
Wow, age 10, I've got a long way to go then. So, Baba, how important do you think it is, emotional intelligence in terms of social integration? So, for example, how important is it for children to make friends, and also, what part does it play when, in terms of learning for children? Do they need a level of emotional intelligence to basically integrate into like life?
100%. If that integration will be wholesome and healthy, 100%, they do need emotional intelligence. I think you need that to be able to interact with people properly. Like I said, I use the word wholesome. That we have different relationships. Not all of them are wholesome. Relationships thrive on communication, okay, verbal and nonverbal. And a big part of that has to do with you understanding another person's emotion, you understanding yours, being able to communicate them, the other person receiving it, you receiving theirs, processing them, reflecting, and being able to respond to that. So 100% emotional intelligence is important. Be unable to communicate properly with people if you're not picking up. We've spoken about nonverbal cues sometimes. Even understanding body language is, part of emotional intelligence. In terms of social integration, if it will be long-term, it will be healthy and stable, I think that is very important for children to, pick up, or for parents to help children start building emotional intelligence so it carries on into adulthood.
Brilliant. Thank you, Barbara. And my last question is to help us parents to deal with children's emotions. Do you have any tips for us to help us to instill like fair play, for example, in kids? Because that all requires a level of emotional intelligence to pick up on other people's emotions and to, you know, play fairly. So do you have any tips for us as parents?
Absolutely. So the first thing would be for children to be exposed to those sorts of emotions anyway. Exposure comes from life. They'll pick up emotions, emotional expression from their parents and their friends. Now, a good way for them to understand what they are picking up, just so that it's not out of context, is we've mentioned reading, for example. When they are reading and, you know, identifying with those emotions and how people deal and process them in books, it's a good way for them to conceptualize those emotions as well. And then as parents, once they've conceptualized those things while they are playing and reading, it's also good for them to be able to express what they are feeling without judgment. And then the emotions that come across as not being very positive, you can help them, you know, process and come to a place of balance, help them use it properly. You know, so for example, you don't tell a child off just because they are angry. You tell them why and where anger has its place, but you tell them how to express that anger properly so that it's not destructive. So helping them express it and then correcting them through that is very helpful. And then, like I've just mentioned anger, but generally we also want to talk children through the difficult emotions, okay, the unpleasant ones. Even, for example, envy or jealousy will be something that's good to address at a young age, as subtle as it might be. It might seem like one that's not pleasant, but at that age, if you explain why the child feels like that and then put it into context, I guess that they'll be able to grow through that, you know, understand why jealousy comes, and then maybe process it better. Okay, guilt and all the other difficult ones, it's good to bring up. So I think talking to children about the difficult emotions is also a good way to build up emotional intelligence. So they're not just focusing on living through the positive ones, but they know how to recognize or identify the negative ones and then, you know, work through them when they show up. So these are a few of the things that I think parents can do.
Great stuff, Barbara. I think that this is such an important conversation because as a parent of young children, as I'm sure you all know, I've had to do a lot of this kind of battle in terms of regulating emotions and addressing jealousy. So why did my friend get a Barbie doll for her birthday and I didn't, because it's not your birthday? But you know, it's these important conversations. Yeah.
Yes, and you mentioned fair play. I didn't address that. So this is a good example. So you understand that this is a way of teaching children to take their turns. Okay, so you have your turn. Somebody also has their turn. So it's not always about you. It's not always about the other person. That's a way of striking a balance, helping them understand that there's a balance, and that's where the concept of fair play will come from. I think eventually.
Perfect. I completely agree. Fair play is something that we're still dealing with and struggling with in this house at the moment. Brilliant, Barbara. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation that we've had today. Is there anything you want to add before we jump off?
Yes, Mary, I would just like to add that growing through our emotions is an everyday task that we build on. Even for adults, if we are honest, we'll say that it doesn't come easy. So starting it in childhood is a very good thing, but we also need to cut our children some slack when it feels like they are struggling. Cut them slack, give them space, and then encourage them as much as we can, because eventually they will get a hang of it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Barbara. You know I love our conversations, and we'll speak again next time.